Hey Stormbounders, I wanted to take a minute to run through the card usage data available on Stormbound Kitty. This is under the official section. You can get card usage data for every league, but I'm going to look today at what's going on in the Heroes League. So this is giving you the most used cards, and you can use this to get an idea of what the meta is. It's not going to be perfect because it's going to be highly dominated by neutral cards because they're used in every faction. This is why you'll see green prototypes and gifted recruits as the most common cards seen in the Heroes League, between 45 and 50% of decks. Frankly, I don't believe that. Feels like 90% of decks, but we'll trust the official data from Stormbound Games. Wild Saber Paws and Hunter's Vengeance are up next. This is not surprising. You have a lot of small units, cheap units of different types, so Hunter's Vengeance is a natural answer to that, and any sort of slower deck is probably going to want to try to run that. Where it gets a little more interesting is in the 15 to 20% of decks range. We see the less common neutral cards: Erratic Neglects, Execution, War Front Runners. We see the newly buffed Boomstick Officers and Lost Psyches in here. This is not that surprising. Boomstick Officers is just a very flexible card with great value. Uh, it's got decent strength on the body, and the ability makes it on paper just an amazing card. You do have to have a little bit of front to make it work, but that's where these cheap neutral cards come into play. The green prototypes and the gifted recruits help out quite a bit with that. Lost Psyches is just big for the mana cost. It's above rate. It's a card that you can play proactively. Boomstick Officers is a reactive card. You have to respond to your opponent's board with it. Lost Psyches is probably the best 3 mana card that you can play to just open out the game on 3. It makes it very difficult for your opponent to answer right off the bat, and helps you just get to the middle of the board so you can establish your game plan. Um, yeah, on paper, it is less strength than something like Boomstick Officers, than something with an effect, but it's just a fantastic opener and a nice way to establish board presence. We also see Frost Hexers and Icicle Burst. This suggests to me that the most common faction is Winter, but since we have Shyvana and Rhymlings down in the lower tiers, what that suggests to me also is that Icicle Burst and Frost Hexers are played in controlling decks as well as Shyvana Rush decks, which, again, not that surprising. It does mean that your opponent is more likely to be Winter than anything else, but it doesn't tell you what kind of Winter deck your opponent is playing. Destructobots and Doppelbots are other faction cards that we see here, and almost the same rate as the Winter Pack cards. What this suggests to me is that every Ironclad deck wants to play Destructobots. Every Swarm deck wants to play Doppelbots. It doesn't really give you any sort of insight into what kind of opponent you're seeing either. Down in the 10 to 15% range, we start to see a little more niche cards, a little more specialty cards. And you see Vindictive Wretches, a specialty defensive card. You see Bladestorm, a specialty defensive card. I gotta tell you, don't just play Bladestorm naked in your deck. It's really not a great idea. It doesn't help you out much if you're looking to establish anything. Clap of Thunder is a fantastic card. Uh, any sort of mid-range deck that's looking to cycle cards quickly, play a bunch of cheap units like the ones we've talked about up here: green prototypes, gifted saber paws. Clap of Thunder fits right in there as an easy way to just buff up your board and dominate the middle of the game. Summon Militia I see on this list as a direct response to Clap of Thunder, or correlating with Clap of Thunder. It's in there because you want to play Summon Militia in your Clap of Thunder deck. Tika's a good rush card, solid rush card. Confinement, a solid defensive card, and a response to that Clap of Thunder style deck. Collector Murs makes a list for what I think is the first time that I've seen. Again, probably pairing with Clap of Thunder. 0 mana tokens is great with Clap. Rhymlings and Shyvana likely belonging to Winter Rush. Windmakers and Unstable Build likely belonging in Ironclad Runners decks. Windmakers is a good flexible tool. It doesn't have a lot of strength on its own, but it has a lot of movement and a lot of defensive value, which makes it something that you do want to add to a lot of those Ironclad Rush decks where you anchor your board with Unstable Build on your opponent's side. You use that anchor to throw in some runners and chip your opponent down, and then Windmakers helps you move back down the board or helps you play defensively to make up for the board presence you lost by putting runners into your opponent's base. And last on the list, Forgotten Souls. Again, it should be in pretty much every Swarm deck. Doesn't tell you much other than Swarm is a faction that is played at a higher rate than Shadowfen is. Again, no Shadowfen cards on the list. So what this tells me in terms of changes from last month, Clap of Thunder, Collector Murs, these cards have really taken off. I expect to see Clap of Thunder changed soon. I see the change to 4 mana as a mistake. It does too much for the mana cost. It's too easy to pair with cheap decks that run Summon Militia, Erratic Neglects, Green Prototypes, Gifted Recruits, Saber Paws, Sparkly Kitties is up here, right? You play as many cheap cards as you can. You get that Clap of Thunder down. That allows you to establish the board and put your opponent on the back foot, and you can just continue to pressure from there. Shyvana is still very prevalent, so play around that as best you can. I've been playing around that with Ironclad myself. I'll get some Ironclad videos out there this week for you guys. Show you how it handles the Shyvana decks, the Clap of Thunder decks. It's been working really well for me. I would definitely recommend it. Happy hunting out there.